Hello, everybody, and welcome to Special Codes. Our goal here is to use code to interpret the world around us in a meaningful way that builds us up and makes us more human. This is a podcast that my buddy and I decided to start up. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name's Taylor.
And I'm Nathan. One of the things that we wanted to do in this very first podcast is introduce ourselves and kind of dive further into the purpose for this podcast. And so, with that, let's let Taylor introduce himself. Go ahead, Taylor. Tell us more about yourself.
Well, as I said before, my name's Taylor. I was a programmer for 7 years, and I've recently become an author. When I was a programmer, I worked primarily with web-based applications. I used HTML, PHP, jQuery, MySQL, that sort of thing.
So, as we're kind of talking about this, there are many projects that you've worked on. Do you want to kind of just tell us maybe one of the projects that kind of sticks out to your mind so that we know what kind of coding experience maybe you do have? So what the question I guess is what one project kind of sticks out to you that you've worked on in those 7 years so far?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I would say there's probably one project that sticks out to me the most in all my years of programming. It was a program that I was writing to run a freezer in a factory.
Hmm.
So you know how in factories they have conveyor belts and various machinery that runs automatically. I had to program a freezer. What would happen was they would dump product onto a conveyor belt and run it through the freezer, and then it would get frozen by the time, well, the theory at least was it was supposed to be frozen by the time it came out of it. So I wrote a program to basically run the fans in there and the coolant and the conveyor belts, and there were thumpers on the conveyor belts, and everything had to basically run and be calculated automatically. That was pretty fun.
Nice. It sounds like a pretty chilling project.
Oh, yeah, very.
Nice.
And there was a lot that goes into that. There's a lot more than just a program because you have to basically coordinate with everybody in the factory for that. We had to work with the electricians because you could write the best program known to the world, but if they don't wire it in correctly, then it won't work.
Hmm. Yeah. And who gets the blame for that usually?
The programmer.
I did everything right.
Well, I mean, it's understandable because to most people, when someone writing a program, it just looks like gibberish on a page. It's sort of this big box of things that they don't understand. So, whenever something goes wrong, that's the first thing they look at.
Hmm. Well, and it's funny too because when they look at it, you just said it's gibberish. So
Hmm.
why why would we go to the first thing that we don't understand? That's
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The electricians and what they do, people understand at a basic level. They might not really understand it and be able to do it themselves. People understand on a basic level what wires are, what they do, what the purpose is. But you could show somebody a page of code and they wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too that you say that because like with even with wiring, when you look, you can see that all the wires are connected. So it's
Yes.
got to be working, right? But with
Right.
coding, there's not that visual connection that can
Hmm.
happen a lot of time. That's interesting.
So that's me, basically. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Nathan?
So I'm Nathan. I've been doing ministry as a pastor, doing youth and children's ministry for about the last 9 years. Recently, though, in the last 3 years, I kind of have switched my profession a little bit in the sense that I'm now doing special education and teaching students with special needs across a wide spectrum of individuals, different subjects, but specifically last year switching with a focus on math and mathematics and helping students who struggle to make connections across multiple math concepts and help them be able to understand and do math basically. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
So you're dealing with a lot of people.
Yeah, of all ages, from from little guys to parents and unfortunately sometimes grandparents who are raising their kids. So I mean that's not an unfortunate thing all the time, but it is hard. We see that a lot too. So very many different age spectrums.
So in your years of experience, what project stands out to you the most?
So One of the things that I'm really excited about that we did at our school is this is kind of a big project that we changed doing. So previously in our mathematics department for our special ed students, they were working in their instructional areas. And when I say instructional areas, it doesn't mean like where their grade is at the lowest. Like we're talking like 12th graders who are doing third grade math. So there's a big difference there. And that kind of sounds like, oh, well, they're in special ed. But here's the thing. One of the problems with doing that is our 12th graders who are about to graduate never got exposed, never got to see the math that their peers were learning. And so we changed things up a couple of years ago with no resistance whatsoever. Because people love change, and we did a two-prong system where we had the students who were struggling with math work in a class that's at their instructional level, working on the things that they're learning currently. But also we created a class specifically designed to help students be exposed to grade level math. So like high schoolers were actually seeing high school math and working and struggling with some of these things, because previously they just never even knew the vocabulary. So like variable, exponent, those kind of things. They never had the opportunity to be exposed to that. And so now with this two-prong system, they're applying what they're currently learning to their grade level math, which is really cool. But one in particular, like the things that was cool about this is that most people, when change happens, it causes stress, anger, frustration, all of these emotions that we have. And one of these parents came to me and said, because of my students' disabilities, they will never be able to multiply. And I don't expect them to ever get to that place. And so to put them into this class and to make them do this is kind of ridiculous. And one of the things that was really cool was we were able to say, like, trust me, like, they're not going to fail this class for trying. If they try and they try and they try because of their disability, they're still not able to, they're still going to pass the class. This is not a class that's meant to do this. And the crazy thing was, after a year in this class, this student was not only just able to multiply, but they were able to multiply 2 digits by 2-digit numbers. The parent and the student were just like, what? And so it was just really cool to see like the excitement come off of people, and that's just one of many stories of success, of just people thinking that they're not able to do something, and when they're given the opportunity to struggle with something, how amazing they excel to it. And so just really proud moment there of that.
Oh, that's good. Often the best victories to have are the ones that you don't expect to get, the
Yeah.
ones you have to work for.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about how we brainstormed this into existence?
Well, that's an interesting story to tell because I didn't really have a direction. I just knew that I wanted to do something, but I don't like talking. So I knew that I had to recruit somebody who did, because just me talking by myself wouldn't go anywhere.
What?
So I came to you, and I think I had some not so great ideas of what to do with this podcast at first.
Yeah, some of them were quite hilarious. But yes.
Maybe some of them might show up someday as a bonus.
Yeah, as a lost dare or something on my account.
Mhm.
But yeah. Yeah, it was an interesting conversation to start off with, because it's always fun to birth something out of a mind as saying like I want to do something, and you nailed it. Doing it by yourself gets you pretty close to nowhere. And so it's been a fun journey to have this conversation of what are we going to talk about. So do you want to just talk about special codes, like the name? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so special codes is derived from what you and I both do. Because I was a programmer and you're a special ed teacher. We wanted to find some way to talk about things through the lens that both of us have, because we have very different personalities, very, very different backgrounds. But we figured we needed some way to come together so we could talk to each other and come to, I guess, understand each other better. So
Mm-hmm.
the term special codes is just a derivation from, well, I work with code and you're a special ed teacher, so
Yeah, well, and I just to add to that too is one of the things that you hit it on is like our personality types are different too, and to say that we in our because we've known each other for how long?
so it's been what, since seventh grade?
Yep, seventh grade. So that was I
That
don't even.
was 2000 and that was
Yeah,
2004.
yeah. That's no. Let's not go there. Uh, anyways, so we've known each other since seventh grade, right?
Yeah, since 2004.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a long time, and in that time we've never had any conflict
Oh,
whatsoever.
never.
Never ever. And but it was interesting because as we were talking in creating this, one of the things that we saw or that we kind of talked about with coding and people who have coding backgrounds, a lot of them or a lot of people really well, and even in your story, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of code and how it works, but the people who work with it seem to love it. Why would you say that people like coding and use coding or are in the profession of coding?
Well, you want the simple answer or a long-winded answer?
I would like your answer, Taylor.
Well,
however, however that looks.
I really got into coding because I'm not a people person. I like technology, techie stuff. So code is really a way to speak to a computer.
Mm,
And if you learn how to code, you can basically talk to a computer and make it do things. On one hand, it's really cool. On the other hand, I get to yell at a computer and its feelings don't get hurt.
Whereas in real world issues, well, and that's interesting because that's what we were talking. It's like part of this is like a code is a language that you used to talk to it. For me, I love people. I love talking to people, and I'm not ashamed to speak and walk with people through many different ways. And so, like with yours to speak code and with mine to speak to people, coming together with this special code is we really want to try to find ways to help people on both sides of this conversation, people who do coding, to use a language that they've studied forever, right? You know coding fairly well, right? It's a language you know.
Well, to various degrees, I know it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know how to figure it out, work with it. It's a language that you know, and using something that you know to communicate better with real human beings. Because when you do yell at an individual, their feelings do get hurt. You
Doesn't
know,
always go very well.
right? It doesn't connect as well. And so, but on my side as well, sometimes it can be hard for individuals, even for myself, to understand it. Like what you were saying in your story about one of your favorite projects is like coding is a foreign language to me. And so I don't understand that. And so for me as well to bridge this divide and help us connect and then ultimately, like I said, building meaningful ways to build us up and make us more human. And really I think us as individuals, but not alone.
Yep.
Right.
In the process of discussing this and talking about technology, I don't exactly remember how the conversation went, but we were talking about how everybody in this modern age is so dependent on technology. And Elon Musk is a entrepreneur. I don't know if anybody here is familiar or not with him, but he's a smart inventor who's got his own companies. He's a billionaire. He's worked a lot with AI and technology and programming. And he has a few kind of frightening theories about the modern world, but
Mhm.
he's talking about how everybody is already almost a cyborg because if you think about it, we in our modern Western world are so dependent on technology. If we don't know the answer to something, we'd pull out our phones and ask Siri. Phones, for a lot of people, have become our second brain. If we don't know the answer to something, we can get the answer on this device almost instantly. So in that way, we're already linked to our technology. The only difference is it's not directly plugged into our brains. There is still a stopgap of it pulls it onto the device and we have to read it with our eyes or listen to it.
Yeah. Actually, that was interesting. My 80-year-old grandpa was showing me this new technology, which was like this bracelet that you flip and the phone comes onto your wrist. It was just interesting how technology, as we see it going, and I think this is where he goes with this though, is to say like its integration into our lives is more than we think it is. And because of that integration, we are cyborgs, like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
because we are so dependent upon it that to be apart from our technology would be to be apart from a part of us. One of the things that he mentioned in this, though, that was really interesting is that of communication, specifically why technology is superior at communicating than we are.
Yeah, in terms of computer talking to computer, computers can talk in fractions of seconds. In a blink of an eye, they've already read entire books to each other.
It's crazy.
So, yeah, so one of the things I think Elon Musk talked about was that if computers ever get to the point where they do become their own independent beings, not reliant upon us, talking to us would be very frustrating for them because we communicate very inefficiently. We talk with our words, and by the time we're done speaking a sentence, they've read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy 3 times. So it'd be like talking to a tree that's emitting low pitched whale noises.
Yeah, yeah, and listening to the interview is like, yeah, it's like listening to us talk like whales.
Mm-hmm.
That's like that's us as human beings to a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that very interesting. Is communication in general when it comes to technology compared to us as human
Yeah.
beings is just way more efficient.
It's also very ironic. We're so dependent on programs and code for everyday lives that when most people don't understand it, don't understand what programming or coding is, they just see movies of somebody typing on a keyboard rapidly and green text flashes across the screen, then the computer does a magic thing and the world is safe.
Mhm.
That's not programming. Programming is some guy sitting there saying, "Why isn't this working?"
Struggling
Smashing the keyboard.
struggling with the technology. Rage quit on the coding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because with this conversation about communication and our misunderstandings, I think that actually as humans we do this too. But one of the things that's interesting about technology, we lose our ability to let others input in our lives because we're used to such a rapid input processing that things get neglected, right?
Right.
So, and this goes back to your technology thing about we're letting it's funny to me because I can read something faster probably than I can say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to integrate, just like Elon Musk said, text is becoming emojis. Things like this are becoming the norm. And as human beings, it's more efficient. But one really big thing we lose, like when you send me a text, there's so much room for interpretation, so
Mm-hmm.
much room for this things. And unfortunately, as human beings, we move to a rapid input of things, whether it be text message, TV. I mean, who knew that binging a TV show would be something, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
this rapid input of things that we neglect something that's vitally important to us. And in a lot of ways, I would say it results in an interpersonal dehumanization. Like in who we are, we neglect ourselves to where we become less human, right?
We're so used to just pushing a button and getting what we want, getting what we need, and computers are very good at doing that. Unless they break down, then we get really mad at them. And humans, there's so much room for error and misinterpretation. I think a lot of what we're struggling with nowadays is because we're so used to getting what we want at a push of a button, and we have to deal with somebody, they're a lot slower than a machine. And that's not a knock on them, that's just how it is.
Hmm.
We get frustrated.
Yeah, well, and I think that's to the detriment of ourselves. And I think one of the things that's really important as we were starting this conversation of this podcast is finding ways to allow ourselves space to become more human and to find meaning in our whale noises.
Yep.
I'm not going to lie, there are people and individuals, myself included, whose whale noises can be incredibly annoying.
So can mine.
Right? And so, but at the same time, when we completely shut that off, we hurt ourselves. And so I think what we're trying to do in this is to use the language people know to help bridge and allow them to actually communicate better with other people, right? Specifically, as we say, we use code to interpret or to see the world around us, using something that people use on a daily basis to bring meaning, use it in meaningful ways that build us up, me individually, but us together, and make us more human, which I think is important.
Right. And I just want to make it very clear what our goal is.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is not to be a coding or a tech tutorial.
Right. We're not going to talk about that.
If you're a programmer and you listen to this, and if you want any advice or anything, this isn't the place to get it, because we're not going to be talking about that. What we're doing is we're trying to bridge a gap that we see between those people who are tech savvy and those who are people savvy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they can be one and the same, but I think more often than not, they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that with Nathan and I, there's been plenty of times where we've conflicted because of our different personalities and different differences of background.
Well, and I would even just say coding area. Just in the creation of this podcast, we have had a couple misinterpretations, coding errors
Mm-hmm.
that have caused us to have conflict, which we resolved. And it's been interesting to use what we've actually prepared in our own lives, just in this preparation for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's been fun.
It has.
Hmm. So, but I think it's important to say we're not going to teach you how to do code.
Yeah.
We're going to use the things of code to talk. And I think it's, you mentioned too, sometimes they can be people who are one and the same. I would argue that because we're two different people, we have, well, even in just my own ness of who I am, I've grown because of you and what you've brought to the table, the perspectives you bring. And so even though somebody might be listening to this and say, well, I'm tech savvy and I'm people savvy, well, I want to pause you and say, just because you're both doesn't mean you can bridge that gap.
And I've got to say, as someone who doesn't really like talking to people, it's been good to talk to you, because it's very easy to get trapped in your own bubble and just think the way you think. And when you come across somebody who doesn't think that way or doesn't have the same program running in their mind, it gets frustrating and confusing. So it's been very beneficial for me to start this up and have this conversation, because it's breaking me out of the shell, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
putting me in a situation that's outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, I think too, it's been fun to watch us both, work on our own communication, just seeing this special thing develop, this special codes develop. It's been fun to to watch the work that we put into it. And as we continue, this is going to be broken up into different episodes, overviewing some things. And as we get some traction, we'll probably do some more things. This is really for us, but also for other people to grow too. Do you want to kind of talk about where we're going to go over the next few, some concepts we're going to cover?
Sure. So at the start, we're just going to be laying a foundation for concepts that we're going to be using going forward. So we're going to be talking about binary and what that is. If you're a programmer, you know what that is, but if you're not a programmer and you don't know what that is, that's fine, we'll get to that. Then we'll be talking about programming languages. We'll primarily be using the ones that I was familiar with, but the concepts that we're talking about could go across multiple. We'll be talking about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and SQL. And then we'll kind of touch on databases and their structure and servers, server client interfaces. If you don't understand what any of that meant, don't worry, we'll get to that. We won't be going in depth into what they are. We'll just give you a brief overview.
I think it's important to say this is not a tutorial, but we are going to help people who maybe like sitting there saying SQL, squirrel, what? Something like that. We're going to be having those conversations because as we prepared for this section, we're going to talk about what those are, but also we're going to connect them to our real world life. It's not just what it is, but we're going to try to interpret these in ways that are meaningful around us. So like with binary, we're setting a foundation for a language that can mean something for us to be human in today's thing. Now, you may not agree with us, right?
That's fine.
Yeah, we don't mind disagreement. And honestly, we encourage feedback because the more feedback we have, the more we grow. We'll do our best not to misinterpret that feedback.
I mean, to be honest, the two of us don't agree on hardly anything.
Well, I mean, we have some foundational levels. We at least enjoy each other's presence.
Yes.
But this is really important for us, though, as we're moving forward, we're setting the foundation for future episodes and for this thing not to just be a 10-episode podcast. We do want feedback. We do want to hear people's opinion. There is a vision long-term for this podcast, but really it is also going to be derived from conversations that are had outside of this. This is supposed to be a starting block for the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is really sort of to get people to have these conversations outside of this, to get a concept and recognize it out in the world, and to help people understand that everybody has their own way of thinking. We're basically going to be lightly touching on the theory of mind, which the theory of mind is the idea that each individual person has their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And we all have to have the ability to recognize that, and sometimes that gets really hard. We aren't an end-all, be-all. We're just two guys having a conversation who found this interesting and wanted to babble about it on the internet, and it hopefully helps somebody in the process.
Yeah, and I think it's not just babbling, it's out of our own expertise. Because I think that was the other thing is like when we first started this conversation for this podcast, we didn't want to just be some babbling idiots. We actually wanted to work into our own strengths so that we could inform people on things that we know, that we've experienced, that we've worked with. So we're not just using computer code because it sounded fun. It's Taylor's expertise. And we're connecting it to human beings and how they relate to one another and things, because that's my expertise. Watching, helping people get healing from some very traumatic things or walking through struggles of misunderstanding. People is what I do. Coding is what Taylor does, and bridging those together.
Right. And just to be clear, neither of us have PhDs in philosophy or psychiatry, or I don't even know the appropriate terms for that. We're just basically two guys with an idea, and hopefully it works.
Yeah, working into our strength. So, and maybe by the end of this podcast, we might have our PhDs in our fields of expertise. Who knows? But as of right now, we're working out of our expertise in what we know. And hopefully we might even bring on some people who are PhD people to talk about some of this stuff. But future fun stuff looking down. But we're excited for special codes. I guess this is the end of our first podcast, and we're excited to see you in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. I'm Nathan.
I'm Taylor.
Have a great day, everybody.